I didn't expect much from that night, just another routine graveyard shift. I'm Officer Greg Harrington, and I've been with the force for almost 12 years. Over that time, I'd seen enough to make me think nothing could surprise me anymore. But trust me, nothing could have prepared me for this. It was just past 11:30 p.m. when the call came in. A 911 operator reported strange activity in a remote industrial district. The caller was a man whose voice trembled as he whispered about something hunting him. His phone cut off mid-call, leaving dispatch unable to trace the exact location. Protocol demanded we check it out, so I grabbed my gear and headed out solo. The area in question was a deserted stretch of warehouses and storage yards, long since abandoned. As I drove through, my patrol car's headlights illuminated the skeletal remains of factories, graffiti-scrawled walls, and weeds that had overrun the cracked asphalt. The place had an eerie, heavy silence, broken only by the crunch of my tires and the occasional echo of my engine. When I arrived at the approximate location, my radio sputtered with static. I keyed the mic and called in my position, but the signal was barely getting through. That's when I noticed the light. A faint, flickering glow came from one of the warehouse windows. I parked my car and stepped out into the cold, gripping my flashlight with one hand and resting the other on my holstered firearm. My breath came out in misty puffs as I crept toward the building. The door was slightly ajar, creaking as I pushed it open. Inside, the air smelled of mildew and rust. My flashlight beam swept across empty shelves, rusting machinery, and shadows that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. Then I saw it, a figure standing at the far end of the room. "Police, identify yourself," I called out, my voice echoing. The figure didn't move, just stood there, facing the corner like it was in timeout. Its posture was unnatural, bent forward, arms hanging limply, head tilted in a way that shouldn't have been possible. I called out again, louder this time, and stepped closer. The figure twitched. That's when the lights overhead began to flicker violently, throwing the room into a chaotic strobe effect. Each flash seemed to distort the figure's outline, stretching and compressing it as if reality itself was glitching. My instincts screamed at me to back away, but my legs betrayed me. I froze, flashlight trembling in my hand. Then the figure moved. It turned around, slowly, revealing a face or lack thereof. Its head was smooth, featureless, and reflective, like a liquid mirror that seemed to ripple with every breath I took. The thing let out a guttural screech, so loud it felt like it pierced directly into my skull. My flashlight exploded in my hand, plunging the room into darkness. I drew my gun and blindly fired twice. The muzzle flashes gave me brief glimpses of the creature darting toward me with inhuman speed. I ran. I don't know how I made it out, but I stumbled back into the open air, gasping and disoriented. My car was gone. The entire lot was different, filled with strange markings etched into the pavement, glowing faintly in the moonlight. The warehouses around me looked distorted, their shapes twisting unnaturally as if they were being stretched into other dimensions. Then came the sound of footsteps, not the kind you'd expect from boots or shoes. These were wet, slapping footsteps, like bare feet trudging through puddles. I turned to see more of them, figures just like the one inside, emerging from the shadows. Their reflective, faceless heads caught the moonlight, giving them an otherworldly glow. They moved in unison, their twitching bodies jerking unnaturally as they closed in. The only cover was an old storm drain nearby, its rusted grate slightly ajar. Without thinking, I dove into the darkness, landing hard on the damp concrete below. The footsteps stopped above me. For hours, I sat there in the filth, barely breathing, hearing the distorted echoes of their movements as they searched for me. Occasionally, I'd hear a screech, a sound so unearthly it made my skin crawl. When the first rays of dawn filtered through the grates, the noises ceased. I climbed out cautiously, finding the area utterly deserted. I returned to the station, filed my report, and handed in my badge that same day. What I encountered that night wasn't human. I still don't know what it was, but I can tell you this. If you ever find yourself alone in an abandoned place at night, leave immediately. Some things aren't meant to be seen, and some things won't let you live if you see them. For weeks after that night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faceless, mirror-like heads reflecting my own terror back at me. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, clutching at my chest, half expecting to hear those wet, slapping footsteps outside my window. But the strangest part wasn't the nightmares, it was the reaction from the department. The day after I quit, I was called in to discuss my report. I walked into a sterile conference room where two men in dark suits, government types, sat waiting for me. They didn't introduce themselves, didn't offer a handshake, just slid my report across the table and asked me to clarify certain details. What did the figures look like? Did they speak to you? Did you notice any unusual markings on your body afterward? Their questions were invasive, clinical, as if they knew more about what I'd seen than I did. When I pressed them for answers, they deflected with vague remarks about protecting national security. But their most chilling statement came at the end of the interview. "Officer Harrington, we strongly advise you to refrain from sharing this experience with anyone, for your safety and theirs." That was it. No explanations, no reassurances, just a thinly veiled threat. The stranger in the coffee shop, I tried to move on, to pretend like it had never happened. I took a job as a security guard at a local mall, a far cry from the adrenaline of police work, but at least it was safe, or so I thought. One rainy afternoon, about a month after I quit, I stopped by a diner for a coffee. The place was nearly empty, just a few regulars and an old jukebox humming quietly in the corner. I was halfway through my cup when I noticed him. A man sitting alone at a corner booth, staring at me over the rim of his newspaper. He looked familiar, but I couldn't place him. Late 40s, neatly trimmed beard, sharp suit. He didn't belong in a greasy spoon like this. When our eyes met, he smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was knowing, like he could see straight through me. I tried to ignore him, but my nerves were shot. I paid my bill and hurried out into the rain. As I unlocked my car, I felt a presence behind me. "Officer Harrington," the man said. His voice was calm, almost friendly. I turned slowly, my hand instinctively reaching for the gun I no longer carried. "You shouldn't have gone into that warehouse," he continued, stepping closer. "You saw something you weren't meant to see. Who are you?" I demanded, my voice trembling. He didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small object, a flash drive. "Take this," he said, pressing it into my hand. "It'll answer some of your questions. But be careful. They're watching." Before I could respond, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd of umbrellas. The flash drive that night, I locked my doors, pulled the curtains tight, and plugged the drive into my laptop. It contained a single folder labeled Project Echo. Inside were dozens of files, videos, documents, and images. The first video was dated 2 years before my encounter. It showed footage from a police body cam. The officer was responding to a disturbance at a suburban home. When he entered the house, he found the family gathered around their dining table, motionless. Their faces were blank, smooth like mannequins. As the officer approached, one of them turned its head unnaturally fast, staring directly into the camera. The video ended abruptly. The next file was a document titled Behavioral Patterns of Type 5 Entities. It described creatures that could mimic human form but lacked features, beings that fed on fear and could manipulate their surroundings to trap their prey. One line stood out. "Prolonged exposure to Type 5 entities can result in psychological deterioration, paranoia, and eventual disappearance." My hands were shaking as I opened the final file. It was a photograph, grainy, black and white, but unmistakable. It was a picture of me, standing in the storm drain that night, surrounded by the faceless figures. The visitors since that day, strange things have been happening. Lights flicker in my apartment. My phone rings at odd hours, but there's no one on the other end. And sometimes, late at night, I hear it. The faint sound of wet, slapping footsteps in the hallway outside my door. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. They're watching me just like the man said. I can feel their presence, closing in, waiting for the right moment. If you're reading this, please take my advice. Stay out of the shadows. And if you ever see a figure with no face, run. It's been weeks since I last dared to leave my apartment. Every day feels like a countdown, though to what? I don't know. I've barricaded my door with furniture, turned off every unnecessary light, and left the television running 24/7 just for some semblance of normalcy. But no amount of preparation can stop what's coming. It started subtly. Random power outages in my building. Shadows that seemed to stretch just a bit too far. One night, I caught my own reflection in the window, only it wasn't moving the way I was. I turned to face it and it smiled. I didn't. The final encounter, the knock, came at exactly 3:33 a.m. A soft, deliberate rapping on my door. 3 knocks, then silence. I sat frozen, staring at the door from across the room, clutching a kitchen knife. My breathing was shallow, my pulse pounding in my ears. Then it came again. 3 more knocks. "Who's there?" I croaked, though I already knew there would be no answer. The silence stretched out, heavy and oppressive, until I couldn't bear it anymore. I stood, my legs trembling, and approached the door. "Greg!" A voice called softly from the other side. A voice I recognized. It was my mother's voice, but she's been dead for over 10 years. My stomach churned, and tears welled up in my eyes. "No," I whispered, backing away. "Greg," the voice repeated, insistent now. "Let me in. It's okay. It's just me." I shook my head violently. "You're not real," I screamed. The voice stopped. For a moment, the silence was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat. Then came the sound that haunts my nightmares. The wet, slapping footsteps. They were inside. The living shadows. I turned just in time to see them. The faceless figures, emerging from the dark corners of my apartment like living shadows. They moved jerkily, as though they were being dragged by invisible strings. I screamed and lashed out with the knife, but it was useless. The blade passed through them like smoke. One of them stepped closer, and I felt an unbearable coldness radiating from its body. Its smooth, mirror-like face bent toward mine, reflecting my wide, terrified eyes. And then it spoke. Not in words, but in my own voice, echoing in my head. "You saw us. You shouldn't have." I stumbled backward, tripping over the coffee table. My head slammed against the floor, and the world went black. The man in the suit. When I woke, I was sitting in a sterile, windowless room. My wrists were cuffed to the metal table in front of me, and a single bright light hung overhead. Across the table sat the man from the diner, the one who'd given me the flash drive. "You've caused quite a mess, Officer Harrington," he said, his tone more annoyed than concerned. "Do you have any idea how much trouble you've brought upon yourself?" What's happening to me?" I croaked. My throat was dry, my voice barely audible. The man sighed and leaned back in his chair. "You saw something you weren't supposed to see. The entities, they're drawn to curiosity. By chasing answers, you made yourself a target." He slid a folder across the table toward me. I hesitated before opening it. Inside were photographs of people I recognized. Officers, civilians, even that terrified man who made the original 911 call. "What is this?" I asked. "Missing persons," he said simply. "All of them encountered the entities. And now, so have you." The man folded his hands and leaned in. "Here's the deal. You keep your mouth shut. Forget everything you've seen. We'll relocate you, give you a new identity. You'll live, but only if you agree to let this go." "And if I don't?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. He smiled thinly. "Then they'll find you. And next time, there won't be anyone to save you." I sat in silence, staring at the folder. My entire life was crumbling around me, and yet, deep down, I knew I couldn't walk away from this. The world deserved to know what was lurking in the shadows. But before I could decide, the man stood and walked to the door. "You have 24 hours, he said without looking back. "Choose wisely." The warning that was 3 days ago. I don't know why they haven't come for me yet, but I can feel them getting closer. If you're reading this, it means I've decided to share my story. Not because I want to, but because I have to. The faceless figures are real. They're out there, hiding in the dark corners of the world, waiting for someone to notice them. And once you do, they'll never stop hunting you. So consider this your warning. If you ever see a figure with a mirror for a face, turn away. Don't follow the lights. Don't go into the shadows. Because if you do, they'll make sure you never come back. 3 days after the ultimatum, I received another visit. It wasn't the man in the suit this time. No, this was different. It came in the form of a package, left on my doorstep in the dead of night. The plain brown box bore no labels, no markings. But inside was a single item, a VHS tape. Who even uses VHS anymore? My mind raced as I stared at the relic, debating whether to destroy it or find a player to watch it. Against my better judgment, I chose the latter. I dug out an old VCR from my closet and plugged it into the ancient TV I kept in my bedroom. With shaky hands, I inserted the tape and pressed play. The screen flickered to life, showing grainy footage of a familiar scene. The storm drain where I had hidden that night. The camera's perspective was high and steady, like it had been mounted on a pole or a building. I watched myself crawl into the drain, shaking and terrified. But this time, the tape revealed more. The faceless figures appeared moments after I disappeared into the drain. They surrounded the entrance, their movements jerky yet deliberate. But then something new happened. One of the figures turned and looked directly at the camera. My blood turned to ice. It was like it knew it was being watched. Slowly, it raised a hand and pointed at me. The screen went black. Then the sound began. A deep, guttural hum filled the room, vibrating through my chest. Words started to form within the noise, though they weren't spoken. They were in my head, loud and invasive. You were warned. The TV exploded, sparks flying as the room plunged into darkness. The pursuit, the power was out. My apartment was pitch black, the only light coming from the pale glow of the moon through the window. Then I heard it, the wet, slapping footsteps. They were inside. Panic surged through me as I stumbled toward the kitchen, grabbing the largest knife I could find. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't make a difference. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until they stopped just outside the bedroom door. I braced myself, knife shaking in my hand. The door creaked open slowly, revealing nothing but shadow, and then it stepped into the room. The figure was larger this time, its reflective surface distorting my own terrified face into a grotesque parody. Its head tilted as it regarded me, a low, guttural noise emanating from deep within. "Stay back," I shouted, my voice breaking. The figure didn't move. Instead, it raised a long skeletal hand and pointed at me. The room around me seemed to warp and twist, as though reality itself was bending to its will. I swung the knife, but the blade passed through it like smoke. The figure surged forward, and the world went dark. The awakening when I woke, I was lying on cold, damp concrete. My head throbbed, and my vision blurred as I struggled to sit up. I wasn't in my apartment anymore. The air was heavy, filled with the smell of decay and mildew. I recognized the place immediately. It was the storm drain. But something was different. The walls pulsed faintly, like they were alive, and the darkness seemed deeper, more oppressive. And then I heard them, the wet footsteps, echoing through the tunnels. I wasn't alone. I scrambled to my feet, every instinct screaming at me to run. The tunnels twisted and turned, disorienting me as I stumbled blindly through the maze. The footsteps followed, never far behind. Eventually, I came to a large, open chamber. In the center was a strange object, a metallic orb, pulsing with a dim, otherworldly light. Its surface was covered in the same markings I'd seen etched into the pavement that night. I approached cautiously, my breath hitching as the orb began to glow brighter. Then I heard it again, the voice in my head. "You've come too far." The choice as I stared into the orb, images began to flood my mind. Visions of other people, police officers, civilians, even children, being hunted, consumed by the faceless figures. And then I saw myself, A future where I was one of them. My face a smooth, reflective void, stalking the streets in search of new prey. The voice spoke again, softer this time. You can still escape, but you must choose. Two paths appeared before me, one leading back to the surface, the other deeper into the labyrinth. Instinctively, I knew the choice wasn't just about survival. The first path meant forgetting everything, erasing all knowledge of what I'd seen and returning to a life of ignorance. The second path meant uncovering the truth, but at the cost of my humanity. I hesitated, the weight of the decision pressing down on me like a physical force. And then I made my choice, the end or the beginning. I can't tell you what happened after that. Not because I don't want to, but because I don't remember. When I woke again, I was back in my apartment, the sunlight streaming through the window. Everything seemed normal. No broken TV, no faceless figures, no evidence of what had happened. But I know it wasn't a dream. The scars on my arms, the faint hum that lingers in the back of my mind, and the occasional flicker of my reflection moving on its own are proof enough. I made a choice that night, and whatever path I took, I'm not sure I'll ever truly escape the consequences. So if you ever find yourself standing at a crossroads, faced with the unknown, remember this. Some truths are better left undiscovered, and some doors should never be opened. Since waking up in my apartment, life has felt off. It's as though I'm stuck between two worlds, the ordinary one I left behind and the nightmare I stumbled into. I don't know if I truly escaped, or if this is some cruel illusion created by them. The scars on my arms have started to glow faintly at night, tracing the same alien markings I saw on the metallic orb. They pulse with an otherworldly rhythm, keeping me awake as I stare at the ceiling, wondering what I've become. Worse still are the reflections. Every mirror in my apartment has been covered or smashed. It doesn't matter, though. I still catch glimpses, reflections in the TV screen, in the window, even in a puddle on the street. And every time it's the same. My reflection moves just a fraction of a second out of sync. I know it's not me anymore. The visitor a week after the storm drain, I got another knock at the door. This time, it wasn't at 3:33 a.m. It was broad daylight, yet somehow that made it even more unsettling. I peered through the peephole and saw a young woman, mid-20s, dressed in plain clothes. She didn't look threatening, but there was something about her posture, too still, too deliberate, that made my skin crawl. "Mr. Harrington," she called out, her voice calm and even. "I need to speak with you. It's about what you saw." My heart stopped. How did she know? "I have nothing to say," I barked through the door. "I understand," she replied, unflinching. "But if you don't let me in, they'll send someone else. Someone less patient." The threat was subtle, but it was there. Against my better judgment, I unlocked the door and let her in. The offer, again she introduced herself as Evelyn. No last name, no badge, no credentials. She claimed to work for a specialized division that monitored events like the one I'd encountered. "We call them echoes," she said, taking a seat at my kitchen table. "They're not from here, not from anywhere we can comprehend." "What do they want?" I asked, keeping my distance. "They don't want anything. They simply exist, feeding off the fear and chaos they create. They don't have motives, not in the way we understand." Evelyn leaned forward, her gaze piercing. "But what's important is that you've been marked. They don't let go easily." I instinctively rubbed the glowing scars on my arms. "You have two choices," she continued. "You can join us, help us study them, contain them, maybe even stop them. Or..." She hesitated, her expression darkening. "Or what? Or you run. You disappear, change your name, live off the grid. But even then, it's only a matter of time before they find you." The truth of Project Echo, despite every instinct screaming at me to walk away, I chose to listen. Evelyn showed me what joining would entail, and what I saw chilled me to my core. She took me to a facility buried deep beneath the city, accessible only by a nondescript freight elevator in an abandoned warehouse. Inside, the air was thick with antiseptic and paranoia. Men and women in lab coats and tactical gear moved with purpose, their faces pale and tight with stress. "This is Project Echo," Evelyn said as we passed rows of containment chambers. Inside the chambers were the figures, some faceless, others in various stages of mimicry. One had half-formed human features, a grotesque approximation of a man, its body twitching violently against its restraints. "They're trying to become like us," Evelyn explained. "The more they observe, the better they imitate. But they're never perfect." I stopped in front of a chamber holding one of the orbs. It pulsed faintly, casting eerie shadows on the walls. "Why not destroy them?" I asked. Evelyn smiled grimly. "We've tried. They don't die. They don't even seem to register pain. All we can do is contain them." The first mission joining wasn't just about understanding the echoes. It was about fighting them. Evelyn handed me a file detailing my first assignment. A small town a few hours away had reported a surge of unexplained disappearances. Entire families vanished overnight, leaving behind nothing but empty homes and warped reflections in the mirrors. "We believe it's a breach," she said. "An echo cluster is active in the area. Your job is to assess and, if possible, neutralize." "Neutralize?" I scoffed. "I thought you said they couldn't be killed." "They can't. But the orbs can be disrupted. Think of them as beacons. They draw the echoes to our world. If you destroy the beacon, the echoes lose their anchor." The mission was simple on paper, but as I loaded into an armored vehicle with a team of heavily armed operatives, I knew nothing about this would be simple. The town of Shadows, we arrived in the dead of night. The town was unnervingly quiet, its streets deserted, windows dark. As we moved through the town, the telltale signs of an active echo cluster became evident. Shadows moved where they shouldn't. Reflections lingered a second too long. And always, the faint, rhythmic hum of an unseen force. We found the beacon in the town square, an enormous orb, glowing and pulsing like a diseased heart. Surrounding it were dozens of echoes, their faceless forms twitching erratically. "On my mark," Evelyn's voice crackled through my earpiece. The operation that followed was chaos. Gunfire, explosions, the unearthly screeches of the echoes as they dissolved into smoke. But the orb wasn't going down without a fight. As we approached, it began to expand, tendrils of light snaking out to ensnare us. One by one, my team fell, consumed by the orb's relentless pull. In the end, it was just me and Evelyn, standing before the pulsating monstrosity. "Greg," she shouted, tossing me a device. A small metallic rod crackling with energy. "This will disrupt it. You have to get close." I hesitated, the orb's tendrils reaching for me. "Do it," Evelyn screamed, her voice cutting through the chaos. I ran, the shattered anchor the moment I plunged the device into the orb. The world exploded into light and sound. I don't remember much after that, just fragments. Evelyn dragging me to safety, the echoes dissolving into nothingness, the town square collapsing into itself as the orb imploded. A new beginning. When I woke, I was back at the facility, hooked up to machines. Evelyn sat beside me, her face a mix of relief and exhaustion. "You did it," she said softly. "The cluster's been neutralized. For now." But the scars on my arms told a different story. The echoes weren't gone, not entirely. And as long as they existed, I knew my fight wasn't over. Life didn't return to normal after the mission. It never could. Neutralizing the echo cluster in the town felt like a victory at the time, but it left behind a scar on reality itself. Evelyn called it the ripple effect. The scars on my arms weren't just a personal curse. They were a tether, a connection between me and whatever dimension the echoes came from. And it wasn't just me. Everyone who had been exposed to an active echo cluster was marked in some way. The town we'd saved was abandoned now, its remaining residents relocated under the guise of a gas leak. The truth was more disturbing. The echoes left behind something in the air, a hum too low for the human ear to detect, but strong enough to drive animals and humans mad. Evelyn told me the facility was working on a way to contain these zones, but her voice carried little hope. A shadow in the system. After weeks of recovery, I was summoned to a classified debriefing. It was in the heart of the Project Echo facility, down in the lower levels where even Evelyn didn't have clearance. The room was small and cold, the kind of place designed to make you feel insignificant. Across the table sat two men in suits and a woman in military fatigues. One of the men pushed a folder toward me. Inside was a series of photographs, grainy surveillance stills of a figure with a mirror-like face. "This was taken yesterday," the man said. "In Washington, D.C." My stomach turned. The echoes weren't supposed to appear in areas without a beacon. "How?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The woman in fatigue spoke. "That's what we need you to find out." The hunt they paired me with a new team, a mix of military and civilian operatives. Evelyn wasn't coming this time. She said she had other priorities. I didn't believe her. Our mission was simple: track and capture the Echo. But as I prepared for the operation, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. For starters, the Echo in the photographs didn't behave like the ones I'd encountered before. It wasn't skulking in shadows or tethered to a beacon. It was walking openly through the city, moving with purpose. The more I studied the photos, the more I realized something else. The figure wasn't just imitating humanity, it was improving upon it. Its movements were fluid, its posture confident. If you didn't look at its face, you'd never know it wasn't human. The encounter, we tracked the Echo to an upscale apartment complex. The building was eerily quiet, the air heavy with tension as we moved through the halls. I was the first to spot it. The Echo stood at the end of a long corridor, its reflective face turned toward a window overlooking the city. For a moment, it seemed almost contemplative. "Hold your position," the team leader barked, but I ignored him. I stepped closer, weapon drawn. The Echo didn't move. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice steady despite the fear clawing at my chest. The Echo turned slowly, its featureless face catching the light. And then, to my horror, it spoke. "You already know," it said, in a voice that sounded exactly like mine. The revelation, the room spun. This wasn't just an Echo, it was me. Or rather, some twisted version of me. Its voice, its movements, even the faint scars on its arms. All identical. Before I could react, the team opened fire. The Echo didn't flinch as the bullets passed through its body like smoke. Instead, it turned and bolted, moving faster than anything I'd ever seen. We gave chase, but it was like trying to catch a shadow. The Echo led us on a wild pursuit through the city, always staying just out of reach. Then it disappeared. The aftermath back at the facility, I demanded answers. "What the hell was that?" I shouted, slamming my fists on Evelyn's desk. She sighed, her face pale. "We think it's a Class 6 anomaly, a fully formed Echo capable of independent thought." "And why did it look like me?" Evelyn hesitated. "Because it's been watching you, mimicking you. The more you're exposed to them, the more they imprint on you. That's why your scars glow. You're connected." Her words hit me like a freight train. "So what now?" I asked, barely holding back my anger. "We track it," she said, "and we pray we can stop it before it evolves further." The message that night, as I sat in my apartment, I noticed something new. My scars were glowing brighter than ever, pulsing in time with a faint hum that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. And then, on my laptop screen, a message appeared. It wasn't an email or a text. It just materialized, as though written by an invisible hand. "You can't stop us. We are you." The screen went black. "The war begins. I don't know what's coming next, but I can feel the Echoes getting stronger. They're learning, adapting, becoming more like us with every passing day. This isn't just about survival anymore. It's a war for the very fabric of reality, and I'm at the center of it." After the message on my laptop, sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. Every second I wasn't moving, I felt them watching, their presence hanging over me like a suffocating cloud. Evelyn pulled me back into the facility the next morning. She didn't bother with pleasantries. There was no time for that anymore. "The Echo you encountered, the one that looked like you, it's spreading," she said, her voice sharp with urgency. "Spreading?" I asked. She pulled up a map on the screen, showing clusters of activity marked in red. Cities across the country were lighting up like Christmas lights. They're evolving faster than we anticipated. And they're not just hunting individuals anymore, they're assimilating. The assimilation, the new echoes weren't just mimicking humans. They were replacing them. Entire neighborhoods were going dark, their residents either disappearing or re-emerging as hollowed-out versions of themselves. Perfectly polite, perfectly normal on the surface, but dead inside. Surveillance footage showed people entering homes and never coming out. Families sitting together in eerie silence, their reflections moving out of sync. "They're building something," Evelyn said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What?" I demanded. She shook her head. "We don't know, but whatever it is, we're running out of time to stop it." The offensive, the team was mobilized that night. We were heading to one of the red zones, a small town in the Midwest that had gone completely silent. "Your echo will be there," Evelyn told me as we suited up. "It's been seen near the outskirts, leading the others. You're the only one who can get close to it." I didn't bother asking why. Deep down, I already knew the answer. The connection between us. The scars, the reflections, the whispers in my head. It wasn't just one-sided. Whatever this thing was, it wanted me as much as I wanted to stop it. The red zone, we arrived under the cover of night. The town bathed in an unnatural glow from streetlights that flickered erratically. The air felt thick, oppressive, like the very atmosphere was conspiring against us. The first thing we saw was a family sitting on their front porch. They didn't move, didn't blink, just stared at us as we passed. Their faces were eerily blank, and their reflections in the window behind them didn't match their movements. "They're already gone," one of the operatives muttered. We pushed deeper into the town, following the hum that grew louder with every step. It led us to the town square, where we found it, the largest orb I'd ever seen, hovering above the ground like a pulsating heart. And standing in front of it, waiting for me, was the echo. The confrontation, it was almost perfect now, an exact replica of me down to the smallest detail. But its face still shimmered, that mirror-like surface betraying the void beneath. "I knew you'd come," it said, its voice identical to mine. "What are you?" I demanded, raising my weapon. It tilted its head, a mockery of curiosity. "I am you, and I am more." Behind it, the orb began to pulse faster, its glow spreading out in waves that distorted the air around it. The other echoes emerged from the shadows, dozens of them, their faceless heads reflecting the chaos. "You can't stop us," my double said, stepping closer. "We are the future. We are evolution." The sacrifice, the team opened fire, their bullets ripping through the echoes, but it was like fighting smoke. The figures dissolved and reformed, advancing relentlessly. "Greg," Evelyn's voice crackled in my earpiece. "The orb. You have to destroy it." I ran toward the pulsating mass, dodging tendrils of energy that lashed out like living things. The device Evelyn had given me, a compact disruptor, hummed in my hands, its energy building as I approached. But the echo, my echo, stepped into my path. "You think you can end this?" It sneered, its voice dripping with malice. "This isn't the end. This is the beginning." It lunged at me, its movements impossibly fast. We collided, tumbling to the ground in a blur of fists and energy. I felt its cold, empty hands wrap around my throat, but I didn't stop. Summoning every ounce of strength, I shoved the disruptor into its chest and activated it. The device exploded in a blinding flash, taking the echo with it. The collapse, the orb shrieked as cracks spread across its surface, light pouring out like liquid fire. The other echoes froze, their forms flickering as the orb began to implode. "Get out!" Evelyn screamed over the radio. I barely made it out of the square before the orb collapsed in on itself, sucking everything into a singularity. The force of the blast threw me to the ground, and for a moment, all I could hear was silence. The aftermath, when I came to, the town was gone. Literally, the entire area was a smoldering crater, the buildings and the people erased from existence. The team pulled me from the rubble, their faces grim. "You did it," Evelyn said, though her tone carried no relief. "The orb is gone. The cluster is neutralized. But I knew it wasn't over. The reflection back at the facility. I stared at my reflection in a cracked mirror. For the first time, it stared back. Not just mimicking me, but watching me. And then it smiled. The war wasn't over. It was just getting started. After the destruction of the orb, I thought I'd bought us time to regroup, to understand what we were fighting. But the war didn't pause, not even for a second. Evelyn was waiting for me the next morning, her face pale and drawn. She didn't congratulate me, didn't thank me. Instead, she handed me a file thicker than any I'd seen before. "What now?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. She sighed, the weight of the world in her voice. "We've discovered something worse." The network. The file contains satellite images, surveillance reports, and sketches from analysts who had pieced together a horrifying truth. The echoes weren't isolated incidents. They were part of a global phenomenon. Every red zone we'd neutralized, every orb we'd destroyed, they weren't separate. They were nodes, and they were connected. "They're building a network," Evelyn explained, spreading the documents across the table. "The orbs are just relays, sending energy, information, and something else." "What?" I asked, my stomach nodding. She hesitated. "We don't know, but the more nodes they activate, the stronger they become." The signal. As we pored over the data, a disturbing pattern emerged. Each new orb appeared closer to a specific location, a point in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, hundreds of miles from the nearest landmass. "What's out there?" I asked, pointing to the map. "Nothing," Evelyn said. "At least, nothing we've been able to find. But if the echoes are converging there, it's not by accident." The outpost. A week later, I found myself on a cargo plane heading for a remote naval outpost, the closest human settlement to the coordinates. The facility had been abandoned years ago, but Project Echo had recently reactivated it as a monitoring station. The moment we landed, I felt it, the hum. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there, vibrating in my bones. "Do you feel that?" one of the operatives asked, his voice tight. I nodded. "They're close." The outpost's equipment was state-of-the-art, designed to monitor everything from seismic activity to deep-sea currents. But what it had detected wasn't natural. The readings showed massive energy spikes coming from beneath the ocean floor, directly below the coordinates. "It's a construct," Evelyn said, staring at the screen. "A what?" "A structure, or something like one. The echoes didn't just arrive. They've been building something down there." The descent. We didn't have time to debate. A team of divers was assembled, equipped with specialized suits and equipment to withstand the pressure at those depths. I wasn't supposed to go. Evelyn insisted I stay behind, but I couldn't. "They're connected to me," I argued. "If something goes wrong down there, I might be the only one who can stop it." Reluctantly, she agreed. Into the abyss. The descent was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. The further we went, the darker it became, until the only light came from our suits' beams. The hum grew louder, more intense, reverberating through the water. And then we saw it. A massive, otherworldly structure, pulsating with the same eerie light as the orbs. It was ancient, yet alive, its surface covered in the same alien markings that now scarred my arms. "Jesus Christ," one of the divers muttered. The echoes were everywhere, their faceless forms drifting around the structure like sentinels. They didn't seem to notice us. Yet, the core at the center of the structure was the source of the hum, a gigantic orb, larger than anything we'd encountered before. "This is it," I said, my voice shaking. "This is what they're protecting." The team prepared the disruptor, a massive device designed to overload the orb's energy. But as they activated it, the echoes reacted. They swarmed us, their movements faster and more coordinated than ever before. "We're outnumbered," someone shouted. "Keep them off me," I yelled, grabbing the disruptor. The choice. As the echoes closed in, I realized something. Destroying the orb wouldn't stop them, not entirely. The structure was more than just a node. It was a gateway. The echoes weren't just invading. They were opening a door to their world. I could disrupt the orb and close the gateway, but it would come at a cost. The energy release would destroy everything within miles, including me and my team. Or I could let it stand, buy us more time to prepare for the inevitable. The final act. Evelyn's voice crackled in my headset. Greg, what's happening down there? They're not just here to feed, I said. They're trying to cross over. Then you know what you have to do, she said, her voice breaking. I stared at the disruptor in my hands, my scars glowing brighter than ever. This isn't the end, I whispered. It's just the beginning. And then I activated the device. The fallout. The last thing I remember is a blinding light, followed by a deafening silence. When I woke, I was back on the surface, the structure destroyed, the echoes gone. But the scars on my arms were different now. They didn't just glow, they pulsed like a second heartbeat. They'll be back, Evelyn said, standing over me. You know that, don't you? I nodded. The fight wasn't over. It would never be over. But for now, the gateway was closed, and I was still standing. It's been 6 months since we destroyed the gateway. 6 months of uneasy quiet, where every flickering light, every strange shadow, felt like the start of something worse. The echoes weren't gone. I could feel them. They were regrouping, waiting for the right moment to strike. Evelyn and her team worked tirelessly, analyzing every scrap of data we recovered from the gateway. What we found was horrifying. The gateway wasn't the only one. It was just the largest. Across the globe, smaller constructs were beginning to emerge, their energy signatures growing stronger with each passing day. The echoes weren't just coming. They were planning a full-scale invasion. The warning. The first sign came in the form of radio interference. Static-filled broadcasts from deep-sea outposts, warning of strange lights in the water. Then came the disappearances, entire ships vanishing without a trace, their last transmissions filled with panicked screams and the sound of wet, slapping footsteps. By the time we realized what was happening, it was too late. The invasion. The first wave hit New York City. At first, it seemed like a blackout, rolling power outages that left entire neighborhoods in darkness. But then the reports started coming in. Shadows moving where they shouldn't, reflections that didn't match, people vanishing into thin air. When the echoes revealed themselves, the city descended into chaos. Faceless figures flooded the streets, their movements erratic yet terrifyingly efficient. They didn't just kill, they absorbed, pulling people into their void-like bodies and leaving behind nothing but empty clothes. The military